And then I made this video about the shields in the game, and I kind of got into a rant because they're really bad and stuff. And then I posted it on Reddit and everyone was kind of mean to me, and being a YouTuber is hard, you know? Oh, hello there. Didn't see you come in. Yeah, let's talk about some swords, shall we? In all seriousness though, I already made a video on shields in Valheim, and my judgment was kinda harsh. YouTube loved it, the archeology community loved it, and Reddit hated it. So guys, I love this game, and I'm not shitting on it because I hate it. I'm criticizing it because I love it, and I see a lot of room for improvement. Before we get into it, I want to say that I'm by no means an expert at anything really. So if you think I'm wrong, feel free to do your own research, put it in the comments and I will have a look at it. But still, you don't need to worry about misinformation here, since this video will be approved by esteemed archaeologist and medieval combat expert Roland Watzeka. Alright, so this time I have some swords and axes on display. Laid out in front of me are the swords in the game in chronological crafting order, so let's start with the bronze sword. To have a better look at the weapons, I have erected this little display post so we can hang the weapons here. But let's talk a little bit about bronze first. Bronze is an alloy consisting of copper and tin, as accurately depicted in the game. Now, I don't want to get too deep into geology here, and I think where to find copper and tin in the game is kind of correct, but if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I recommend this video by fellow world builder Artifexian. But keep in mind that the worlds in this game are randomly generated, so I think we can excuse inconsistencies. So, you have collected copper and tin, smelted them into bronze ingots, and made a sword out of it. But did you do it correctly? Well, yes and no. The Bronze Age was roughly 3300 to 1200 BC. That's 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Sword finds from that period in Scandinavia often looked more curved, like these. But that doesn't mean the sword is wrong. In fact, this exact type of blade was done a lot somewhere else in the world. Maybe you've guessed it, I'm talking about the Roman gladius. Specifically, this sword is somewhere between the Fulham and Pompeii type gladius, and far from being impractical. So in theory, this blade shape could have been done anywhere in the world. But bronze swords would mostly be made in one piece, which is not the case here, and they would be thickest in the center. It's a little hard to tell with the game's highly stylized pixelated graphics, but I'd say this sword either has a fuller, a hollowed out section in the center of the blade, which was not really done with bronze swords as far as we know, or it could be a center rib, which would be perfect. So let's assume this is the case here. The pommel is rather small, but that's fine. The crossguard on the other hand is not historically accurate for bronze swords, but it's reminiscent of later Viking Age swords, so I guess it's plausible. All in all, my guess is that it would be rather top heavy, complementing the fighting style of our Viking, which is basically swinging a baseball bat. And by the way, like I said in my video about shields, I'm not expecting the devs to change the fighting style. It's very much simplified, which is a conscious choice they made, and we have to respect that. I would expect a AAA title to have a more refined fighting system, but for a small team of 5 people I can totally respect their decision, and in the end they made it super fun, and that's what's important for a game. Except for spears. Those are a pain in the ass to fight with, but that's a topic for another video. Back to the sword, I have to say one last thing about the hilt. You can't really tell from the look of it, but it's pretty clear from the materials used in crafting that the hilt is supposed to be made of wood and wrapped in leather. And to be honest, although it isn't historically accurate, I can totally see that being done. So I've got no complaints about that. So all in all, I would say this sword is entirely plausible. I can see this being dug up from some Bronze Age grave exactly as it is. Good job, Irongate. Next we have the iron sword. In my opinion, this is one of the better swords because the proportions seem right. There really is nothing to fix in this sword. Let's just compare it to an actual Viking sword in terms of historical accuracy or lack thereof. The only thing I can really criticize is the blade shape. It should have at least some taper towards the tip, and the tip itself should be more roundish. But there are a lot of good things on this blade too. It's a little hard to tell with the highly stylized pixelated graphics, but I think the shadow in the center indicates that it has a wide fuller, as Viking swords often would. I think the devs did a great job with the little resources they had at their disposal here. The crossguard comes pretty close to some of the examples on the left, while the pommel resembles that of the sword on the right a little bit. I guess it's kind of a wild mix between sword styles, but at least they are all Viking style elements, and even though the pommel is a little small compared to the rest of the sword, I don't think that is a problem. The reason you would have a properly shaped pommel that was even tilted a little to the side was so it would fit in your hand better. This would reinforce your grip if you grip the sword like a rapier for stabbing motions or overswinging. Again, this is not a problem because it just makes the sword a little top heavy, complementing our fighting style, and our Viking is just gripping the sword in a tight fist, so there's no real need for that. Come to think of it, maybe our Viking wasn't the best fighter in his past life, which is probably why he ended up dying on the battlefield and being carried to the 10th world. Anyway, I like the sword. It is very close to the original swords, so let's have a look at the next one. Next up is the silver sword. Just like the silver shield, this is my favorite sword in the game visually. It is very reminiscent of, for example, this Saxon sword of the 10th century, although the blade is a little bit on the thin side. We could even classify it as a Peterson type X Viking Age sword. I really like the slender design, but to me it looks like the weight center would be very close to the hilt. It is not a fierce cutter like the other swords, but more of a dueling sword, good for fast moves and stabbing. So this one is not really complementing our fighting style that much. And another problem I see with it being so thin, but also being used as a baseball bat, is that it would probably break easily. And I'm not even considering its biggest problem yet. It is made of silver. Unfortunately, that's just impossible. As I stated in my shields video, silver is a precious metal, and compared to iron it is very soft, not to speak of how outrageously expensive and valuable this sword would be. This is a one-time stab a werewolf and watch it burn weapon that would be blunt after a few cuts, and it would probably just bend on impact if you hit something really hard. And don't tell me silver is magic in the game. The only thing that the game actively tells us is that silver is effective against werewolves and skeletons, or I guess demons in general. So hand-waving this with magic would be lazy world building. Let's try to fix it instead. So silver's too soft for a blade, it needs to be iron. But can you maybe mix it? In my quick online research, I found that you could make an iron-silver alloy, but only with a silver percentage of, drumroll please, 1%. If the silver content in your alloy exceeds 1%, it will weaken it and stains will form. So that's not really worth it. Instead, we should have a pure metal blade and crossbar. Then we could add some silver inlays on the blade just for the looks. We also don't really need a fuller because remember, we kinda want a top heavy sword and we already have a huge pommel as a counterweight. So we just absolutely go ham on silver inlays, making a somewhat heavy blade. The pommel can be entirely made of silver, and while we're at it, have the grip wrapping be silver cord instead of leather wrapping. Like in this historical example from the Oslo Museum of Cultural History. There we go. So much silver on this blade. Material progression saved. And it even fits our crude, unrefined fighting style better than what we have here. Also, since this would be a crazy expensive sword already, might as well add a ruby to the pommel, so those are not just in the game for selling. And I know what you're gonna say now, this isn't realistic anymore, it's just a fantasy weapon now. And you're right, but it's either that or get rid of the silver weapons altogether and only have steel weapons with silver inlays. Alright. That was a lot considering I really like this sword already, but this is just something about those silver weapons in the game. They are just not very believable. Roland himself made a very good suggestion on how to actually fix this issue. Why not get rid of silver in the game completely and replace it with mithril, which is already an established silver-based fantasy material that is supposed to be very strong. I think this would be a great fix. Okay, the last sword I have here is the black metal sword. I placed some torches behind me so you can see the texture of it a little better. One thing up front, in my last video I explained how a shield could be made entirely of black metal without weighing 100 pounds by declaring that black metal is a very light fantasy material, and I want to stick to that. But even if this wasn't super light, this sword is surprisingly plausible. Let's assume this was completely made of steel. This look comes very close to falchion. These plates could exist like this by being very thin. So thin in fact, they would often rust away completely, leaving only a slightly stronger backbone. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a good picture of it, because if you Google falchion and rust, all you get is 500,000 kids selling a rust knife skin in CSGO. Good thing I have an actual archaeologist on my side. I don't know any evidence for falchions in Viking culture, but it seems like there have been similar blade shapes, so let's roll with it. The crossguard should be a little thinner under normal circumstances, but if black metal is very light, this is okay, and same goes for the relatively mighty pommel. So all in all, surprisingly, I don't hate it from a realism standpoint. One thing I absolutely hate though, and this goes for all black metal things in the whole game, black metal has absolutely no business being so damn ugly. It looks like you can't really shape it, and there are even little bumps on the blade. Why? This is a metal, it is being smelted and formed into perfect little ingots, but you can't make a proper sword or shield out of it? This bugs me, especially since this is the last weapon in the game for now. And once I beat all the bosses, I have to look at it for the rest of the game. Please just give me something pretty. But oh well, I guess that's a design choice, so I'm just not using those weapons. So why don't we look at some axes instead? Here we got some of the axes in the game and they are pretty good. First we got the stone axe. It's just a stone stuck on a stick, so I'm not really gonna talk about this any more than I have to. There's just one question arising: how did we get the stick on the stone? In my opinion, you could just stick it on, put a wedge in the other side, and then it wouldn't come off that easily. Stone is very brittle, so it would break pretty fast, and it does break pretty fast, so I guess that's fine. Of course, it wouldn't be a very effective tool, and that's also fine, because in the context of the game, it's the first weapon you make. Next we have the slightly more effective flint axe. I really got nothing to say about this. The shape is fine, and I even got the handle with the hole right. You can see the exact same replica in this video. Next up is the iron axe. I'm actually skipping the bronze axe because it looks exactly the same. And actually I could just skip this one too, because it's pretty much perfect. I just want to mention one thing. It is in fact a one-handed battle axe. It is pretty slim and thin, which makes it a nice and quick weapon, and it's very close to real life examples. But this also makes it a little less effective at woodcutting, because a thinner blade can get stuck more easily. So should we maybe have a dedicated woodcutting axe like people have nowadays? Well, from a historical standpoint, no. I had a lengthy discussion with Roland about this topic, and as it turns out, people just used their axes as all-purpose tools back then. Cutting down trees wasn't done to the same extent as nowadays, obviously, and there was no need for splitting wood all the time, because people would rather collect brushwood from the forest. Solid wood logs would be needed elsewhere in construction and crafting, so these problems would rarely occur. So this time, the weapon in the game is actually historically accurate, but if we see it in the context of the game, we should probably have a chopper instead. Alright, last one-handed axe I have here is the black metal axe. And to be honest, again, the shape is not too bad if we think about black metal as this very light fantasy material. So all I really have to criticize is the same stuff as with the black metal sword. It's just kinda ugly, and I don't think it has any reason to be like that. The last thing I have here is the battle axe. That's what the game calls it. When I saw it in the workbench, I was stoked because I thought I would get another one-handed axe that is faster, because the other ones are supposed to be woodcutting axes. But then I got this monstrosity, and boy, I am not a fan. Not to say there aren't any two-handed battle axes, there certainly are, but there's so much wrong with it. First of all, I don't understand why it's not hanging straight from the hook, but cocked like that. It's a weird choice, but I guess it was intentional. But what is really wrong about it is how slow it is. So, hear me out. Not even from a realism standpoint, but just from gameplay. Do you think this weapon is fun? I crafted it, tried it out, and just put it away again. I was even disappointed that I had spent so much iron on it. The wind-up on this weapon is so painfully slow that your enemies can just casually walk away from you while you try to hit them. Like, dude, I like anime too, but you know you can't really charge up a swing. I guess they are justifying it being so slow by it being pretty thick, but if you look at real life examples, it should be neither of those things. If you look at these Dane axes, for example, the blade was ground down so thin it rusted through on some of them, much like the falchion I mentioned earlier. Look how fast this thing should actually be. And thank you to Matt Easton from Scholar Gladiatoria channel for allowing me to use his footage. This is him handling a Dane axe of similar proportions, and I can very much recommend this video if you want to know more about Dane axes and house guards, the Viking bodyguards and house guards. So, if we had a nice and thin axe blade on this, as it should be, we could make it a lot faster and, you know, usable. One more thing about this axe though. There seems to be some kind of tissue wrapping around where you would grip it low. You can't quite tell, it might also be color, in which case ignore what I'm about to say. But if it is indeed some kind of wrapping, we should get rid of it. As you can see in Matt's demonstration, you want to slide your hands up and down the shaft, as one does, to grip it either high and low for precision cuts, both hands low for more powerful swings, or even both hands high to strike with the butt. Any wrapping would only get in the way of that in my opinion, so it's not optimal. But I wouldn't exactly criticize it either, I just wanted to mention it. Again, our Viking is not using any of these techniques, so you do you, Viking. Just remember that this is why you're in this afterlife situation in the first place. Alright, to quickly recap, most of the weapons are fine, although not historically accurate, but most of them are certainly plausible. Although, again, to me it doesn't look like there has been much research done. And I think as a developer, or content creator for that matter, you have a certain responsibility to not spread misinformation. So what can we take away from this for our own world building? Well, first of all, if you would create your own fantasy world, you could do whatever you want. But art imitates life, and most things are based on some historical example. You should respect the culture you choose and research it properly. In doing so, not only will your world be more believable, but it will also stop the spread of misinformation. And most importantly for your own world, real-life examples and cultures bring certain restraints with them. And if you respect those, you automatically have to flesh out your world more and it gets more in-depth. Take for example the silver sword. If we would respect the fact that silver is not a sword material, we would end up with a completely different sword. And maybe one that wouldn't make me go, wait a minute, That's not possible. Or, if we take the other approach, we would automatically get the information that the player needs to know silver is magic in this world, and it is our responsibility as world builder to communicate it to the player. And as always, communicating something to the viewer, player or reader, show, don't tell, is always the best approach. At this point I was gonna come up with some example on how to fix it, maybe have a magical silver skeleton boss instead of bone mass, but honestly I think all of these approaches are dumb, because you can have a proper workaround by just fixing the sword instead of fixing all the other lore. Oof. This has really come full circle back to my theme of world building for this channel. Next time we're gonna have a look at some of the other weapons. I'm not gonna cover all of them, and the third one is gonna be the last video in this mini series. Stay tuned for more tips on world building. I'm also gonna get into pen and paper role playing in the future. This is a relatively new and small channel, so if you wanna help me out, feel free to like, comment and subscribe. And I'm not just saying that as a phrase, because every comment, like and everything helps the YouTube algorithm to get my stuff out there. Thanks again to Roland Warzöcher for helping me out so much, and thank you to Matt Easton for allowing me to use his footage and being awesome in general. I've been a fan of his channel for years now, and if you like swords and stuff, you should definitely go check it out. Last but not least, you can follow me on Instagram for some dank memes and channel updates. I hope that I'll see you again. Stay safe, have a wonderful time. Muffin out.